schedules are put together, so it's actually kind of difficult to match them. But there's two sides of every part, obviously.
So tell me, so most of us in the public here are going to have our introduction to a sommelier is going to be in a restaurant. So
Absolutely.
Tell us how that works. Tell us what we can expect.
Well, the
if
sommelier,
they show up at our table, you know, that's not a very common thing around here.
Well,
if they show up at our table, what are you,
well,
who
really,
are you?
The sommelier is the person that is in charge of the wine list. They're in charge of training the staff mainly, so that the staff is confident and able enough to communicate what the wine list is all about to the customer. The sommelier is actually just a catalyst between the chef and the wine list to make them match and make them work for the customer, whereas your staff is going to be the one really out there on the floor making sure people's questions are answered. But if something else would happen, the sommelier can come out and help everybody out, but he's not going to be the main person out there.
So they're not the ones opening the wine.
No, really,
the
that's.
wine,
I mean, you can definitely
because I've
do
seen
that.
where they do that.
You definitely. I mean, I won't say that you don't, but 9 times out of 10 it will be the servers that will be doing that. But it is the sommelier's job to train the servers in the ways that the sommelier guilds have trained us, and that's where it really comes from. Again, because of how the restaurants have changed so much, there's not this quote-unquote white tablecloth, candlelit, everything is so formal. Now there's very trendy, hip, fun restaurants that have taken parts of the white tablecloth era and trained them for our world today. Typical white tablecloth service takes a lot of time, and today time is money. So I mean, we've definitely modified everything to fit that still formal, very cool, hip aura, I guess you could say, but it's not exactly what we're trained in. And that's what sommeliers are now to do, is to decide what style the restaurant wants to be. Whether it wants to be the white tablecloth, walking around the table 6 different times to serve people wine, or just making sure that everything is done in a manner that makes the customers feel the most welcome. That to me is the best sommelier. The best server is a person you know is never there, but when you have to have something, they're always there. So it's just one of those things, and that's what the sommelier's main job is to do, is to run inventories, make sure the wine list is correct and it reflects what the chef wants to show, and also training the staff to make sure that they're ready to answer questions because of how much more educated the public is now.
So you have to be working in simpatico with the chef.
Absolutely.
So tell us about how those interactions.
Well, it's pretty crazy. There's a lot of tasting of wine that goes on, and tasting.
What a fun job.
Well, yeah, everybody says that, but tasting is so intense. There's no drinking. I mean, everything is taste, spit, making sure that your palate stays fresh. But with that,
and do you have to have like different crackers or something? In
no, not really. I mean, it's just one of those things.
So you're not really consuming.
No,
you're just trying to get a heightened sense of
Absolutely.
what the flavors
going
might
on.
be.
Mm-hmm.
And
the main thing you're trying to match
pairings.
Exactly are going to be the subtleties, the acidities in the food and the wine, because that's really the big thing that will change the dish. Acidity is what cleanses your palate and makes you ready for either the next bite or what's interesting. Wine without acidity is dull and uninteresting. So that's the big thing that you're looking for, are pairs that work together, whether you're contrasting something, comparing something within the food, or trying to bring out other parts that the chef is wanting to show. So I mean, there are different, let's say, an easy pair, champagne and caviar. Well, why is that such a perfect pair? Well, because champagne has a ton of acidity and caviar has a ton of saltiness, and acidity and salt are two comparative matches. They just match up so well. Same with Sauterne, which is a sweet dessert wine, and foie gras. There you're looking not as much as a style, but richness. Sauterne is very, very rich, whereas foie gras, which is fattened goose liver, is very, very rich in itself. So right there you're playing on the size of the dish, not actual flavors. The last of the 3 perfect pairs would be port and blue cheese. There you're pulling off a sweet and savory or sweet and sour kind of thing. So it's really those compare and contrast that you go through the whole bunch of different wines with the chef to try to find a quote-unquote perfect match. There's obviously dishes are very complex, and it's almost impossible to have a perfect quote-unquote match for every food. chefs these days like to add this and like to have saffron infused this and whatever. So that that in and of itself is very difficult. So you have to focus in on one thing and do one thing very well or perfect, whereas doing everything mediocre is not what you're looking for. So that's the big difference. You just have to taste through a few different things that have the styles that you want to convey, and then just find out what works the best.
Well, in hearing you explain all of this, I mean, I've gone into some of the nicer restaurants where they say, well, they recommend this wine with this meal, and you're like, well, you know, I'm really not a white wine person,
Absolutely.
or I'm really not a red wine person. But from what you've all told me, you should have that wine.
Exactly.
I mean, there's been a lot of thought and a lot of tasting
absolutely.
by
There's
people
a ton
with,
of
you
stuff
know,
behind the scenes that goes on,
known
making
for their
sure
palates.
that exactly that make that dish better. The perfect wine pairing for me is something that takes a mediocre dish or a mediocre wine and makes them better. If you look back at the Italian culture, let's say, very, very simple foods, very, very simple wines, but together they're just sublime. I mean, it's one of those things that simple and simple make extremely complex and extremely balanced. And that's what you're looking for, is balance over the whole meal. You don't want something to outshine one or the other. You want the food to taste better, you want the wine to taste better together. And that to me is the perfect food and wine pairing. So some people may not like whites, that's fine. Some people may not like reds. Some people may like sweet and some people may like dry. Always drink what you want to drink with food. It will be a better experience. But in my line of work, I mean, I spent hours trying to figure out why this cheese went with this wine, or why this food, I picked this out for a reason, to make sure that you got everything that you wanted as well.
So is there anything you can tell the home cook, the home foodie that's going to throw a party, on how they can just simply figure to do a wine pairing?
Absolutely.
One benefit you have is that you can have multiple types of wine to taste. You know, we have to go buy those, and
No,
it's
I
a little
completely
expensive.
understand. Hey, I'm a buyer myself, and I understand how expensive the wine trade can be.
So what can you just give them in a nutshell? Just
In a
to,
nutshell,
just not just make a big
the main
mistake with
thing
their
that you
pairings.
need to, we're trying to get away from the rule of pairing white wine with white meat and red wine
white
with red
with
meat. I mean,
fish
that's
and-
very common, but nowadays there's so much more out there available to you. The big thing you have to be concerned with is acidity. Acidity, I keep going back to this, is what makes wine interesting and what makes food interesting. By matching acidities, they will kind of coalesce and come together and then go away, and then you're left with all the other stuff going on. Acidity also pairs with saltiness. One of my favorite pairs is like champagne and popcorn, or champagne and French fries, because of how salty the food is.
That sounds
Fried
so
chicken.
decadent.
Fried chicken and champagne. It's one of the coolest things you'd ever do. Absolutely.
Wow.
Think of smokiness. Think of robust with robust, or delicate with delicate. You never want a huge, massive Napa Cabernet with a salad. It just doesn't work together.
So how do we know what is an acidic wine?
Acidity will mainly be found in Old World wines. And when I
Okay.
say Old World, I mean basically anything from Europe. That's where wine originated. Food and wine just go together quintessentially. I mean, you can't go to a meal in Europe without having wine, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Granted, our cultures are very different, that if you have a glass of wine with lunch, you're kind of looked at like, hey, what's going on there, which is fine. But in Europe, everything that works together for a reason. And that's where I always start. The best food wines are from Europe. The New World, America, everything basically outside of Europe, Australia, New Zealand, America, South Africa, Argentina, the wines are meant to be consumed mainly by themselves, because the flavors are so much bigger and richer because of our warmer climate. And that will give the wine great staying power by itself. But those are really wines that will overpower your food, the delicacies of your food, and really not make great pairs. I mean, I know the old adage of having a slab in a cab, or a big piece of great beef and some Napa Cabernet, but that's really the only thing Napa Cabernet pairs well with, is a big steak. And I don't know about you, I don't eat steak every single day,
Right.
or, you know,
Right.
you may, that's great, but at the same point, I'm looking for Pinot Noir as a red to go with a lot of different stuff because of how much acidity it has, but also it's tannic and also easy to drink. White wines, Chardonnay I like with a lot of stuff. It's kind of that middle weight white as well. but my favorite white is Riesling. I have a soft spot for Riesling for sure.
Well, Chad, we're going to have to run into a break, but I
Okay.
know I have some people that have been looking forward to this show when they knew you were coming on, because
Awesome.
they love their wines,
No
and
problem.
they're
I'd love
just
to
going to
hear
be replaying and replaying this because they're listening to Joan on the Joan Jerkovich show. But you know, you can certainly replay these if you go to my website, joanjerkovich.com, catch the video outtakes. Chad's already had a lot to say about some of the old world wine habits and some of the history of the wine sommelier. And also you can get the podcast, links to iTunes and my blogs, and we'll be right back. This is 910 KINA Salina. So we went just a bit over, Paul, so we'll drop down to about 7.
Okay.
I was going to say, if you need me to shut up, I talk a lot.
He's going to
So-
do a 3 and then a 1. If you
Okay.
notice, if you kind of,
Yeah,
out of the
throw
corner
my-
of your eye,
throw my
you'll see
fingers
that.
out there.
But you know, when we get going, we can edit.
Okay, that's
So-
no problem.
No, that was
I
amazing.
I can talk all day long, so if you haven't noticed already.
No, I love that. In fact, you know, I get so many people like yourself in here, and I'm so interested in what you're saying. I'm like, why are we doing 2
Absolutely.
guests an hour? We could do the whole hour here.
I completely understand that.
But we can also come back. So, you know, I think, you know, you've gotten a good introduction, and I want to make sure that we take this to what the people at home might get to do,
Okay.
you know, some of the listeners. And so I have a number of different questions that I'd kind of like to go through
Cool.
about, you know, type of glass, you know, just a whole bunch of different stuff. So let's go
Absolutely.
into that.
Cool. Let's do it.
So, Paul, we're going to do 8. It goes so
You need
fast.
7.
I'm sorry. That's right. That's why you're here, guy, to help me out. Welcome back, listeners. This is Joan with the Joan Jerkovich Show on 910 KINA. We're wrapping up our conversation with Chad, our sommelier, and he's already had so much to talk about that I'm going to put him in a direction that I said this is kind of one of those things that I want, you know, the public to kind of know some of the ins and outs of storing wine, what types of decanters, what types of glasses would we use. So let's go ahead and get started with what types of glasses is some of the way that you serve wines important?
Well, that's absolutely probably the most important in the service of wine is the glass that you use. Obviously, crystal is going to be your best serving vessel just because it's thin, it's lightweight, it's easy to understand what the wine does. Obviously, red wine, you're going to need a bigger bowl on your glass versus white wines, you need a smaller bowl.
And why is that?
Because red wines need a little bit more room to breathe, and that extra room inside of your glass is just basically extra surface area touching the wine.
And aerating a wine is so important.
Absolutely.
Tell us what and
it's
why.
the most important thing when
Okay.
serving a wine because aeration is causing a chemical reaction between the molecules in the wine and oxygen. When you're doing that, you're basically starting an oxidation process and a super aging process that speeds up the aging of wine. What you're then doing is taking the wine outside the bottle, which has seen very, very, very minimal oxygenation, to something that's a macro oxygenation, and will just speed up some of the nuances that wouldn't come out of the wine if it didn't see that.
Well, I have to ask you, when you talk about pouring a wine or talking about aeration of a wine, because you mentioned how the acidity in the old world wines was so important in pairing with certain foods. What about those wines that have a lot of sediment in the bottom of them?
Sediment
What do you have to do with that?
Well, that's a good question. Sediment oftentimes will scare people. Sediment is an amazing thing because it's a very, very natural process that happens. Basically, tannin structures will meet up with protein structures and just fall out of the wine. So it's not bad. That just means your wine has not been filtered or fined. It's going to give you extra nuance in your aromas. All you have to do is try to pour off. Typically, that's at the end of the bottle. Let your bottle stand up, 15-20 minutes before you serve it. It will kind of settle to the bottom. Just be very careful when you're pouring to the last glass or so. You will get a little sediment, probably. But tell your patrons or your guests that it's not a bad thing. I hope every glass of mine has sediment in it because it just means that it's either A, organic, B, very natural, or C, just hasn't been fined and filtered, and it's just meant to be the way it's supposed to be. So sediment is actually a very, very good thing, conversely to what a lot of people think about it.
So there's a question I just cannot let you get out of here with, which
Okay.
is to smell or not to smell.
Absolutely. unequivocally.
Let's talk about the cork.
You have to smell. Oh, not the cork. Actually, the
Okay,
smelling of the
we
cork.
gotta talk about the cork because
okay.
people think you're supposed to smell the cork.
It
You
is
tell
now
us, you're the expert.
It's now a faux pas.
It's a faux pas.
Do not smell.